How are you doing tonight? So good to talk to all of you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome, everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. I'm here having a Tuesday night conversation. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I took the train home and I didn't get home soon enough to take my suit and tie off. So I took my suit jacket off, but I'm still wearing my tie and shirt from work. But that's how anxious I was to stream with all of you. The opening stream tonight is going to be very good. The opening remarks that I give, but we'll jump right into that. We'll be getting there. I think it'll be good for all of us. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Be sure to crush the notifications bell. That notifications bell. Be sure to crush it because a lot of you are not getting notifications. And if you don't get notifications, you don't know that we're doing this. Be sure to post this around, invite folks to come watch, post it on Reddit, post it on Facebook, post it in Facebook groups, etc. That would be awesome. And we are going to jump right in. We are going to jump right into the opening remarks. The way this works is I give my opening remarks. The whole time you are sending your super chats, and I'm writing them down with my pen. And then after I'm done with my opening remarks, after that I do the roll call where I call you out as I see you. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. We find out who our audience is. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions until we're done. So it's really up to you to make the second half of the show so good by sending me super chat questions. If you send me a super chat, I will give you an answer within reason, of course. I mean, I may not answer, certain things, but most things I will answer. I will warn you, it may not be the answer that you want, but I will do my best to give you a good answer. So there we go, folks. That's how it works. And so tonight, I'm going to give my opening remarks, and then we'll hopefully have a great Q&A session after that. Folks, I am going to start out by doing what great speechifiers, philosophers, rhetoricians have done for thousands of years throughout history. I'm going to tell a story that makes a point. I'm going to tell a story that makes a point. It's actually a true story that I heard from a friend of mine. And it's kind of a sad story. But I heard it from a friend of mine, and it really fits as an introduction to what I'm going to be talking about in my opening remarks tonight. The story goes like this. This friend of mine, when she was a 4-year-old child, she was visiting her grandparents. And she was at her grandparents' house. She was 4 years old, full of energy, very excited. So her grandfather said, "Would you like to go play in the backyard?" And she, being a 4-year-old girl, was so excited to go play in the backyard. She said, "Yes, I want to go play in the backyard." Well, her grandfather said to her, he said, "Okay, you can go play in the backyard, but you must remember, you cannot touch the tulips. You cannot touch the tulips because the tulips are so important. Your grandmother just loves these tulips that she has made, so don't touch the tulips. And as long as you don't touch the tulips, you can play in the backyard." Now, do you understand? Don't touch the tulips. The girl said, "Yes, I won't touch the tulips." So, my friend went into the backyard, proceeded to play, was having a good time. Her grandmother and grandfather were inside the house, minding their own business. She was outside playing. She walked into the house. Writing it down. She walked back into the house, and her grandparents were very happy to see her come back into the house. From having played outside. They were very happy to see her until she proceeded to pull out of her pocket a tulip. And she pulled this tulip out of her pocket and said, "Look at this pretty flower." She had pulled up the tulip. Now, her grandfather, seeing that she had done this, considered this to, of course, be direct disobedience. This, was an older time when such practices were more common, so he spanked her. And spanked her for disobeying him, pulling up the tulips. However, after he spanked her, and she was crying and in pain, they talked about it, and her grandfather realized that his 4-year-old granddaughter did not know what a tulip was. She didn't know what a tulip was. When he had told her to go play in the backyard, but do not touch the tulips, the 4-year-old girl did not know that the tulips were flowers. And therein lies the problem. She was not being defiant because she did not understand the instructions. The operative word in do not touch the tulips was tulip. And if one does not know what a tulip is, it is very hard to follow the proper instructions. And her grandfather felt very guilty about this. For many years, he felt very, very guilty about having spanked his granddaughter for pulling up the flower, for bringing a pretty flower to her grandmother, because he had assumed that his granddaughter would know what a tulip was. But she did not know what a tulip was, and so, she had not been following his rule, but it was not defiance, she just didn't know. And often I have realized that in a lot of the arguments I have with people, it is a very similar situation, where I am using a word, and they are using a word, and we do not agree upon what those words mean. And because we do not agree about what these words mean, it is very hard for us to have an argument about these terms. And first of all, this problem is exacerbated by the fact that in the United States, nobody knows anything about communism, right? Nobody knows anything about communism. Nobody knows anything about it. Go on the streets of the United States and ask people what dialectical materialism is, and they've never heard it before. Go out on the streets and ask people if they've ever heard the phrase means of production, and they'll never have heard it before. They'll never have heard it before. Write it down. And that is a problem. Because if people don't know anything about what you're talking about, how can you expect to argue with them about it if they don't know what you're talking about? But then it makes it even worse that on top of the fact that no one seems to know anything about communism, people don't know what dialectical materialism is, people don't know what means of production are, people don't know Marxist concepts. On top of that, it seems that for every Marxist concept, there is a dumbed down, stupid reinterpretation or redefinition of it that confuses everyone. And so often when people are arguing with me, people on the internet, and often people that consider themselves to be Marxists, consider themselves to be socialists, are arguing with me, I realize that I am using the scientific Marxist definition of terms, and they are using the dumbed down popular redefinition of terms. And this leads to all kinds of confusion, because to them, the term means one thing, and to me, the term means something else. And I argue that obscuring the scientific definition of terms is a way of obscuring the concepts and the understanding that these terms have behind them. For example, the first term that I will define, since we're here, and that will be the purpose of my opening remarks, is capitalism. Now, what is capitalism? According to many people in the United States, capitalism is money. Capitalism is money. That's basically the dumbed down redefinition of it. If there's money, that's capitalism. Or another version I've heard is capitalism is when some people have a lot of money And some people don't have a lot of money, and that's unfair. Right? That's another definition. Capitalism is a gap between the rich and poor. It is some people having more money, having more money than other people. That is what capitalism is. Some people having more money than other people, money existing, that is what capitalism is. Well, that is not what capitalism is. There was money long before capitalism ever existed. There was money in Rome. There was money in medieval Europe. There's money in socialist societies. Cuba has money. China's got money. Venezuela's got money. Vietnam has money. Capitalism is not having money, but that is the popular definition. So when I get up and say that China is not a capitalist society, you get people who think capitalism equals money, and they go, oh, you're an idiot. Everybody knows, China has money, so there must be capitalist. Well, I have a different understanding of what capitalism means. So we'll start with this. Capitalism is production organized for profit. Capitalism is production organized for profit. When the economy is organized to make profits for a private group of owners, that's capitalism. Friedrich Engels said that under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Mao Zedong, he said, capitalism is profits in command. Karl Marx wrote about the anarchy of production. Capitalism is when production is organized to make profits. That is what capitalism is. Capitalism is production organized for profit. Right? Dollar valuation. That's what capitalism is. It is society and the means of production functioning to make profits for private owners. That's capitalism. When I talk about capitalism, I am talking about society where profits are in command. That is capitalism. Now, what is wrong with capitalism? Well, one problem with capitalism is that some people own the means of production and other people sell their labor power to those who own the means of production. You have the capitalist class, the owners, and you have the proletariat, the workers. And that's an unequal relationship. That is one problem with capitalism. That is by far not the only problem with capitalism, but it is one problem of capitalism, that there is a contrary interest between the worker and the capitalist, that the worker who owns, who sells his labor power is constantly having to face off with the employer, the capitalist, who owns the means of production. That the lower the pay of the worker, the higher the profit of the capitalist. The lower the profit of the capitalist, the higher pay of the worker. That the capitalist extracts his profits from the surplus value created by the worker. That is one aspect of Marx's critique of capitalism, that there is inequality between employers and employees, between factory owners, the owning class, and the working class. That is one aspect. However, that is not the only problem with capitalism, because capitalism is production organized for profit. And the main problem with capitalism is that it holds back human progress. That the capitalist is constantly looking to maximize his own profits. And in doing so, he advances technology. He tries to produce as many goods as he can. He tries to hire as few workers as he possibly can. He tries to get away with paying as many workers paying the workers as little as he possibly can get paid. Thank you, Andre. And in his drive to make profits, the capitalist is constantly driving down the living standards of the working class. He hires fewer and fewer workers. He pays workers as little as he possibly can. He sets up his factories. A single laptop can be made in 15 different countries. He has workers across the planet competing with each other for the lowest wages, the cheapest working conditions. And as the capitalist does this, there becomes a problem. Because workers are also consumers, and no one can buy back the products. And capitalism, this process of advancing technology, maximizing profits, inevitably leads to a situation where the market is full of products that can't be sold. The worker cannot buy back the product that he is producing. Furthermore, in many instances, the capitalist accumulates through destruction. A good friend of mine came up with the phrase accumulation through destruction. The opioid epidemic in the United States is not making the country wealthier. In fact, by turning people into addicts, by killing people, record numbers of opioid deaths in 2020, by killing people, by turning people into addicts, it's making the country overall poorer. However, it's making lots of profits for those big pharma corporations that are driving it. The prison industrial complex of the United States is not making the country wealthier. People are going to prison. In prison, they get paid poverty wages to do slave labor for corporations. In prison, they are locked out of the formal economy. Once they get out of prison, they are reduced to a life of low wages. They're not raising their kids. They're not home with their family. They're not, they are pushed into poverty. The prison industrial complex is driving down living standards. However, it is making lots of profits for private prisons, for private prison contractors. The military industrial complex is not making the world wealthier. Writing it down. Not making the world wealthier. The world is not becoming wealthier because of the bombs and tanks and drones and all the military production in the United States. The economy is falling apart. But military contracting corporations continue to make profits. The rule of profits is not benefiting society. Society overall is getting poorer. The population is becoming more impoverished. Wages are going down. However, technology is advancing. However, people cannot buy back the products they produce. Capitalism creates a system where poverty is created by abundance. Under capitalism, people are hungry, not because there's not enough food, but because there's too much food. Under capitalism, people are homeless, not because there's not enough housing, because there's too much housing. And this is the problem with capitalism. It is an irrational system. Profits in command, the anarchy of production organized for profit, leads to all kinds of problems, right? JBS. Marxism. That is the problem with capitalism. That capitalism is highly unstable. It leads to frequent economic crises, and it holds back the overall advance of humanity toward a greater state of abundance. Technological breakthroughs lead to greater poverty. This is the problem with capitalism. The basic concept that it's unfair between the worker and the employer, that's part of the problem. That is one aspect of the problem. But the problem is much bigger than that. The problem is production organized for profit. And that's capitalism, right? And now we live under what is called imperialism. Now, this is another one of those words that has been, a common redefinition, right? I say I'm against imperialism. And I also tell people that I think highly of Russia and China, and they go, oh, but Russia, Crimea joined with Russia. That's imperialism. You're an idiot. Well, no, I'm not. Because imperialism is not one country expanding. It's not when, regions join with other countries. Imperialism is an economic system. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage. It is the rule of the world by big banks and corporations that hold back economic development. It is a stage of the development of the capitalist economy when monopolies, when a few capitalist corporations dominate countries and begin expanding across the world. The export of capital. Instead of countries exporting products, countries export enterprises. McDonald's is exported all over the planet. Rockefeller, ExxonMobil is exported all over the planet. The export of capital, the domination of the world by a few big corporations, holding back economic development, keeping countries as impoverished, captive markets. That is imperialism. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage. And when I'm talking about imperialism, I'm not talking about one country influencing another country. I'm not talking about one country sending its military someplace. I'm talking about a global economic system. A global economic system where the world is dominated by banks and corporations based in Western countries. Capitalism in its monopoly stage. And so that then brings us to the next question. What is socialism? What is socialism? Socialism is the abolition of capitalism. Socialism is when society takes control of the means of production, and the means of production are no longer operated for profit. Society is when the working class, which is the broad majority of humanity, as representative of all of humanity, takes control of the means of production, and as a result carries out what Friedrich Engels calls in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, production upon a predetermined plan. In the Communist Manifesto, it says the first step in the proletarian revolution is the proletariat seizing the public power, elevating itself to the level of the ruling class, and seizing control of the means of production, centralizing the means of production in the hands of the state. It's when the broad majority of society takes control of the government, and with the government, a new government, mobilized based on the representative of all of society, takes control of the means of production and forces the means of production no longer to function on the basis of profit. It abolishes production for profit and reorganizes production to serve society overall. It is the negation of capitalism. It is society as a whole, led by the working class, taking control of the means of production. Now, what is the vulgar redefinition of socialism? We've been told all our lives, socialism is when the government does it. No. The post office is not socialism. Highways are not socialism. We've been told all our lives, socialism is everyone getting paid exactly equally. No. Socialism is taxation. No. Socialism is redistribution of wealth. No. Socialism is when production is not carried out for profit. It is when the means of production, the banks, the factories, the major industries, the centers of economic power, are forced to serve public good and not the profits of a few. It is the abolition of capitalism by society taking control of the means of production. It is a socialist society if the means of production are forced to work in the interests of public good and not the profits of a few. Now, if you think socialism is worker cooperatives, you are wrong, because worker cooperatives function according to profit. If you think socialism is a capitalist government doing stuff, you are wrong, because every capitalist government that has ever existed does stuff. The post office is part of the U.S. Constitution. Governments build roads, governments form militaries, governments operate prisons, governments sometimes have whole industries that they run. Governments do stuff under capitalism and under socialism and under feudalism. Governments always do stuff. There's always a role for the state in the economy, right? As long as you have a state, it's going to have some economic component. Socialism is when the means of production are forced to work in the interests of society. It is the abolition of production for profit. It is, as Frederick Engels said, it is production upon a predetermined plan. That's what socialism is. Socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries are forced to serve public good. It is when the working class seizes the public power and then proceeds to wrest by degree all means of production from the bourgeoisie and turning them into public property. It is when the means of production are organized to serve public good, not profit. CPC. That is socialism. And what is socialism good for? Socialism is good against. Socialism is good because it lifts the artificial restraints on human progress created by capitalism. In socialism, technology does not lead to unemployment. In socialism, raising the productive level, people working harder, results in society becoming wealthier. Socialism overcomes the irrationality of capitalism. With a rationally planned economy, organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few, you don't have poverty amid plenty. You can rationally organize the economy to keep growing, to keep rising, to keep expanding. And that's what socialism is good for. Socialism is good because it eliminates profits in command. It eliminates capitalism and allows growth to go on and people to rise out of poverty and the economy to expand and living standards to go up and wages to increase without the artificial restraints imposed by capitalism. It unleashes the productive forces. It allows everyone to become wealthier because the economy is no longer irrationally organized for the profits of a few, but it is rationally organized for the good of society. And as production increases, living standards increase, society becomes wealthier. That's socialism. And socialism eventually gives way to communism, which is the ultimate stage. And communism is a world of so much wealth and so much abundance that inequality of all types begins to fade away. Communism is a world of so much abundance in which the state can fade away, in which coercion can fade away. Communism is a world where there is so much abundance that there stops being a need for there to be any form of coercion or any form of inequality. And communism is possible because inequality is rooted in scarcity. Hierarchies are rooted in scarcity. Coercion, patriarchy, all of these things are rooted in scarcity. And the more abundant society gets, the more egalitarian it becomes. However, in states of extreme scarcity, there is a lot of authoritarianism. And that by eradicating scarcity, by moving to a society where there's so much stuff being created that people can just take what they need and do what they feel like doing, this lays the basis for the state going away, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. But communism is a material state based on vast material abundance. And the only way to get to communism is with socialism. Only by eliminating capitalism, getting rid of the irrationality of profits and command, can we unleash productivity to get to communism. The problem with capitalism isn't that it's creating abundance. Capitalism is not creating abundance. It's creating poverty. It's holding back human creativity. It puts artificial restraints on human productivity. But with the abolition of capitalism, with a rational planning of economy, production upon a predetermined plan is henceforth possible. Productive forces can increase, and society can march toward that state of so much abundance, the state withers away. This is what we're talking about. This is what we are talking about. Socialism is about lifting the restraints on human production that are created by the irrational profit motive, and thus laying the basis for humanity to soar to new heights and ultimately get to the final stage of communism. And this is what has happened in socialist societies. China used to be a very, very poor country. Read the novels of Pearl Buck. Read about what China was like when it was a capitalist country under the grip of Britain that propped up its feudal structures in the countryside with its opium wars, prevented the country from industrializing. But then China broke free and organized a socialist economy with 5-year plans, with state-controlled banks and state-controlled factories, farm cooperatives, and they have adjusted their socialist system many times. Writing it down. Adjusted their socialist system many times. They've adjusted their socialist system many times. They have a private sector there, but they also have a very big state sector. They have 5-year economic plans. And as a result, China is far wealthier because their growth has not been restrained by the irrationality of capitalism. The Communist Party is in control and organizes the economy, and this allows growth to continue. The Soviet Union, with its 5-year plans, right? That's commune. The Soviet Union rapidly raised the level of living in the society, built huge power plants, electrified the country, wiped out illiteracy. With its 5-year economic plans, its centrally planned economy, eliminating the irrationality of profits and command. As a result, the Soviet Union became much wealthier. Cuba is far wealthier today than it was in 1959 when it had its socialist revolution. Vietnam is far wealthier today as a result of socialist central planning. Socialism is about overcoming the irrationality of capitalism, unleashing human growth and creativity to a higher level of abundance, moving us toward that ultimate goal of communism. This is what these terms mean. I just defined capitalism for you. I just defined imperialism for you. I just defined socialism for you, and I just defined communism for you. I just explained that the problems of our society, inequality, coercion, hierarchy, patriarchy, all of this is rooted in scarcity. And the irrationality of capitalism keeps scarcity intact, because capitalism is a system in which abundance creates poverty. And every time the means of production become more efficient, people become poorer, and everything comes to a grinding halt. In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a good thing. In a socialist society, self-driving cars would be great, because everyone who has to drive a car for a living wouldn't have to do it anymore, and they'd do something else, and there'd be more abundance in society, because all the people who spend their days driving cars would spend their days doing something else, and doing something else, they wouldn't have to spend their time doing that, so they would input into the economy in another way, and there would be more abundance. But under capitalism, self-driving cars lead to mass unemployment, because capitalism is irrational. This is basic Marxism, what I am telling you. This is basic Marxism. Capitalism is holding back human progress. Socialism eliminates the anarchy of production and lays the basis for communism, a society with so much abundance that the state fades away, that inequality fades away, that social hierarchies fade away, to each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. That is Marxism. What I am just telling you here, this is Marxist economics. It is unleashing human beings to create more. It is uprooting inequality by getting at the economic base of that inequality. It is moving toward vast material abundance. It is eradicating the irrationality of the profit system that holds back human beings from achieving their true potential. This is Marxism. If you don't believe me, go read the Critique of the Goethe Program, where Karl Marx makes it abundantly clear that communism is based on vast material abundance, where Karl Marx polemicizes against the phrase redistribution of wealth and says, no, I don't believe in redistribution of wealth, he says. I believe in changing property relations. Go and read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Friedrich Engels, where he makes it abundantly clear that the goal is to lift the artificial restraints imposed by capitalism. Right? This is Marxism. Go read the Communist Manifesto. It says that the proletariat seizes the public power, and from there proceeds to wrest by degree all capital into the hands of the state. This is just very basic Marxism. Go read The State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin, where he says that in a socialist society, inequality and unjust inequality continue. But under communism, with vast abundance, they begin to fade away. This is basic Marxism, what I'm explaining to you. But the synthetic left, they believe something very, very different. And so when I argue with them, I often am met with this smugness. I'm met with this arrogance, right? Oh my God, how can you think China's socialist? That's stupid. There's money in China. That's capitalism because there's money. Well, no. There was money before capitalism. There's money in socialist societies. That's not got anything to do with it. Oh my God, he says that, that there can be billionaires in a socialist society, but the whole point of socialism is to get rid of wealth. It's to make, it's to stop, this people wanting more and more stuff. No. The problem with capitalism is that it holds back human creativity. The problem with capitalism isn't that it creates great wealth. The The problem with capitalism is that it holds back humanity's ability to create great wealth. That under capitalism, great wealth can only exist alongside great poverty. That's the problem. Under capitalism, you can only have a billionaire surrounded by mass poverty. But socialism lays the basis for all of society to move up and become wealthy. Socialism is not about eradicating wealth. It's about eradicating poverty by rationally controlling the economy and creating so much wealth and so much prosperity in society that all inequality can be abolished, that the state itself can be abolished, that all coercion can be abolished. People say, oh, but, the problem with capitalism is it makes too much stuff. No. If capitalism was capable of producing vast amounts of wealth, the world would look very different. Look at Africa. It's been getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Look at Central America. It's getting poorer and poorer and poorer. After the fall of the Soviet Union, shock therapy economics, George Soros, Jeffrey Sachs, they imposed free market capitalism, and it didn't make Eastern Europe wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. It demolished the place, made it poorer and poorer and poorer. Pennsylvania is not getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier because of capitalism. Ohio, Texas are not getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier because of capitalism. Yes, capitalism is advancing technology. Yes, capitalism is producing things much more efficiently. However, under capitalism, that leads to greater poverty. Under capitalism, greater wealth and greater abundance leads to poverty. This is the problem with capitalism. And what I'm telling you is basic Marxism. This is basic Marxism, but it's been lost. It's been lost. It's been completely lost. Right? Socialism is not about making everything fair and equal. Socialism isn't a worker cooperative scheme in which profits remain in command of the economy. Socialism is overcoming the artificial restraints on human productivity created by the irrational profit system. It is putting society in control of the means of production so that they can function in a rational way, and scarcity and inequality can be eliminated by raising productive forces. This is basic Marxism. This is Marxist materialism, what I am telling you here. And the synthetic left believes something very, very different. The synthetic left believes that the problem is historical progress. They want everyone to be poorer. They think wealth is bad. They look at indigenous societies, around the world, and they think, oh, look, it's so beautiful because they don't have technology. The synthetic left doesn't want to build a rational economy. They want to find people who have too much and punish them and tear them down and get their anger out. They want to have big episodes of rage and punishment to tear down people who have it too good and make them suffer like everyone else. The synthetic left doesn't believe humanity is capable of advancing to higher stages. No, the synthetic left believes the opposite. They believe that humanity has gone too far and we need to go backward. We need to go backward to Mother Earth. The synthetic left doesn't believe human beings are good. It believes human beings are inherently evil, and that's why we need to roll back human civilization, because the stronger and more effective human beings become, the more evil we are. Right? This viewpoint, mixed in with environmentalism, mixed in with social justice, internet rage, mixed in with confused, parts of Marxism that they've co-opted, the worker co-op thing, thinking Marxism is simply that there's workers and employers, and that's not fair, thinking that Marxism is about redistribution of wealth. Some people have more money than others, and that's not fair. These are parts of it, but it's not the essence. What I'm telling you here, if you don't believe me, go and read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels. Go and read Critique of the Goethe Program by Karl Marx. right? This is Marxism. And what these people believe is not Marxism. What these people believe is satanic. What the synthetic left believes is satanic. Now, what the right believes is also satanic. Libertarianism, the belief that, some people are just better than others and compassion is weakness, that's satanic. That's evil. Ayn Rand, Nietzsche, this stuff is evil. What the synthetic left believe, that humans are a cancer on Mother Earth, that we need to drive down living standards, that we need a big catastrophe so that we can go back to nature, that human progress is an affront, that everyone should be poorer. What they believe is satanic. And what do the libertarians and the synthetic left have in common? Is they both oppose collectivism. Libertarians favor economic liberalism. The synthetic left favor social liberalism. But at the end of the day, they are triggered, both of them are triggered by any notion of human beings coming together and solving their problems. They are triggered by the notion that human beings must solve their problems in a collective way. That's what triggers them and offends them. But at the end of the day, collectivism is the nature of mankind. Human beings are collective creatures. We have always worked together. Always. No product in the store today. You go to the store, you will not find one product, one single product that anyone can point to and said, I made that all by myself. There's not a single product you can find that someone points to and say, I made that all by myself. No food. Every food item you could buy at a store is the product of workers who worked and picked it, or led to the slaughter of the animals, or helped cook it, assemble it, package it, put it in the store, sell it to you. Every product in a store is probably the result of thousands of people's combined effort. Every product is produced by the combined effort of workers. Every product is packaged by the combined effort of workers. Every product is shipped through the combined effort of workers. Products are sold to you. They're stocked onto the shelves by the combined effort of workers. Human beings make things by coming together. Human civilization is a story of people coming together to do things. The problem is that right now we are coming together to do things to make profits for a small group of owners. And our collective efforts are being organized around the anarchy of production. But our combined efforts should not be organized around the anarchy of production. Our combined efforts should be organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. Our combined efforts should be organized for the good of society. We need human reason to control the means of production. Society as a whole must take control of the means of production so that the irrationality of capitalism is no longer restraining human progress. This is what socialism is all about. But the synthetic left sees it very, very differently. And if the synthetic left succeeds, the world is going to be in a very, very dangerous place. Libertarian, right-wing, authoritarianism, the notion that some people are superior to others, the notion that that greed is good, that compassion is weakness, this is bad stuff. But the notion that growth is bad, that human beings are not good, that we want everyone to be poorer, that we shouldn't advance technology, this is also bad. And this is how I wanted to open my stream. And I those who are familiar with my content will have heard all of this before. They've heard all of this before, and I apologize for that. I apologize for that. But it is necessary to make all of these points over and over and over again because there is so much misrepresentation out there. And it really gets down to the fact that there's all kinds of people saying that they believe in socialism. And what they think socialism is progressive income tax or starting a worker pencil factory with their friends or, free health care for everybody or, taxing billionaires till they don't have $1 billion anymore. None of that is socialism. I'm for some of that, but that's not socialism. Socialism is production upon a predetermined plan. Socialism is organizing, the means of production to serve society overall. It is eliminating the anarchy of production. It is eliminating the rule of profits. That's what socialism is. Socialism is eliminating the irrationality of the capitalist system so that humanity can soar to new heights. That's what socialism is. And this is what China understands socialism to be. And this is what Vietnam understands socialism to be. This is what Cuba understands socialism to be. This is what Korea understands socialism to be. This is what Nicaragua and Venezuela understand socialism to be. Socialism is organizing the economy to serve public good, to raise living standards, to move toward a society with less and less inequality, in which people are being raised out of poverty. It is raising the productive forces. Socialism is all about growth. Socialism is all about expansion. Socialism is about unleashing human creativity. And I cannot make this point enough. And I apologize for sounding like a broken record. But people don't understand this. They don't understand this. And it's very dangerous that people don't understand this, because there's a lot of people on there who, when they say tulip and I say tulip, we mean totally different things. And as a result of our misunderstanding, our confusion, bad things happen. So that's how I wanted to open my stream for tonight. I appreciate all of you for being here. And now let's do the roll call. Names and locations. And then after that, I'll start answering your super chat questions. I got them all written down here. Keep the super chats rolling in. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Chaya in Montreal, Bobby in Austin, Ghani, Texas, Mintonka, Minnesota, Arturo in Anchorage, St. Louis, Springfield, Char Char Darling in Nassau County, Indonesia, Carolyn Dario with Tamara in his heart from Brooklyn, David in China, Sam in Chicago, West Virginia, Calvin from Saskatoon, Jacaranda in West Covina, California, Utah, Micah in Las Vegas, Edith from Santa Clarita, Kieran from San Diego, Enoch in Australia, John in Tucson, Ramsey in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bermuda, Tony in Tasmania, Prescott Valley, Arizona, Matt Antonio, Danny from Illinois, Jesse, Daniel from Texas, Mo in Toronto, Richmond, Virginia, Austria, Mindanao to Midwest, Olympia Logic, good friend of the program, Las Vegas, Kendall in San Diego, Trans-Marxist, Emma from Ontario, Canada, Hawaii, Robert Webb, AJ from NJ, Nick in California, Nate in Pano in Sydney, Australia, Auckland, New Zealand, Hallie in Arizona, the spinning planet known as Earth, Casey, MO, Paris of the Plains, Kansas City, Missouri, Owen from the road, John in Houston, Detroit, Bronx, New York, Mohsin from Iran, Long Beach, California, Northern Michigan, Naples, Florida. Very good stuff. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, shout out to you. Good stuff, good stuff. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Caden and Chloe from Utah, Northern Virginia, Max the Sax. Great stuff, great stuff. Robert Webb out in Hawaii. All right, folks, keep the super chats rolling in, and now we're going to roll right into our second half of the show. Before I do that, I want to let you know I have so much material. I'm way behind on editing content for the internet. I have so much to edit. I'm editing the rest of the Saxton lectures. Hopefully, the one on Trotsky is up soon. That's the next one. The next Saxton lecture to be posted is the one about Trotsky. So it's a long one, but I got a lot to say about Trotsky, so stay tuned for that. But I also, today, I just posted a great speech by David Cedillo, who is the leader of San Angelo Solidarity, which is an activist group that does community service and community organizing in Texas. And it's a beautiful presentation, just a beautiful presentation telling his life story and how he built this cooperative, socialist group out there in San Angelo. Just a beautiful, beautiful video. So go and watch it if you haven't had a chance. Go and watch it. It's really, really great. It's really, really tremendous. The folks down there in San Angelo, we may, at some point, it looks like we may be sending the John Brown volunteers to Texas. Because, I mean, we have to work that out. It's up to the folks out there ultimately, but, it may happen that we send the John Brown volunteers to Texas, right? Now the John Brown volunteers are in New York City. They're doing amazing work. They were out there today on the subway trains, and they were out there today in Washington Square Park, doing outreach. But it may be that we send the John Brown volunteers down to Texas to help out, because of the great work that's happening in San Angelo and Austin and other places. So, we're trying to work out the details right now. But, there's so much work that needs to be done around the country. So many great things in the works, and I've got plenty more video to edit, but great video from David Cedillo. Please check it out. And if you haven't gotten a copy yet, the latest book from the Center for Political Innovation is available. It's Jesus is a Socialist. It's a compilation. It's, some essays, some Bible verses, quotations from Dr. Martin Luther King, quotations from Eugene Debs and from Edward Bellamy, all, pointing toward the true message of Jesus Christ being a socialist one and an anti-imperialist one. So if you haven't had a chance to get your own copy of Jesus is a Socialist, go order it today. Because it's out there. We've got many copies on their way here to start distributing across the city. Many people are anxious to hear this. So we're doing great work. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. We have so much work that needs to be done, but we're ready to do it. And there's nothing more rewarding than doing this kind of political work. My fear about the John Brown volunteers maybe going to Texas, maybe going to Chicago soon, my fear is losing them because spending time with them is so rewarding. It's so rewarding to be able to engage with them about Marxism. This last weekend, we intervened at the Nicaragua event, countered the counter-protesters. You can watch the video of that. That was tremendous. We went to a church in Manhattan to support the Sandinistas and to support the Nicaraguan foreign minister who was there giving a presentation facing right-wing disruption. Before that, the John Brown volunteers, they went to an Andrew Yang rally. They went to the March for Universal Basic Income, and they're not for universal basic income, but they were there to engage with the people about socialism, have a conversation with them about what socialism means. Very beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. Just absolutely beautiful. And, they're doing such amazing work, and they need your support. And if you want to support them, that would be great. But we're moving ahead. We are moving ahead. I've got more Saxton lectures. I've got more video from the California conference, the Milo conference to edit. We got David Cedillo up there. That's the first bit we put up there. But there's a great talk by Ramiro. It's a great talk by both of the members of the Convo Couch. I gave a presentation out there. I'm going to edit all of that. I got a lot of editing, a lot of video editing to do. We're getting a lot done. There are reading groups forming all over the country. We're doing great stuff. So keep the super chats rolling in, and I will start answering your questions. All right. The first question came from Chaya, and she asked, is capitalism creating a culture of distrust? I would argue that it is, because under capitalism, everyone is competing with everyone else, right? Everyone else is kind of your rival, right? You're competing with other workers for jobs. You're competing with other people for test scores. You're constantly trying to prove that you are more valuable to your employer. It creates a culture of individualism and selfishness in which people are played against each other. Absolutely. And how would socialism eliminate that? Well, in socialism, the success of one is the success of all. In socialism, your success does not come at the expense of everyone else necessarily. Now, there could be situations where some people get more than others, etc. But in socialism, it's the economy being organized to serve public good and not profits. So there's much more collective interest in society. And that lays the basis for people to work together much more. Someone asked about red culture and the Communist Party, the Russian Federation, and Soviet aesthetics. I do know that, yes, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, I've been to their headquarters. I reported from there during the 2018 elections, and they definitely do use Soviet aesthetics. And there are many folks in Russia who identify with those aesthetics. They consider that to be a very important part of their heritage. So perhaps that does help them. I don't really know. Again, I'm not in Russia. I don't speak for the Russian Communist Party. But, it seems that way. The Communist Party, the Russian Federation, certainly does use images of Stalin and images of Lenin, etc. That certainly does seem like an aspect of what they do. No doubt about it. So there you go. There you go. All right. The Aral seawater crisis in the Soviet Union. I don't know enough about that. I just can't comment on it. I just don't know enough about it. All right. Why has the dollar devalued in the year of 2021? Easy. A currency becomes more valuable the more people who use it. It becomes less valuable the less people who use it. That's generally how it works. If a lot of people are using Deutschmarks, the Deutschmark goes up. If less people are using Deutschmarks, the Deutschmark goes down. If a lot of people are using the British pound, the British pound goes up. If a lot of people are not using the British pound goes down. The dollar has been pretty darn good because of the petrodollar. You can only trade oil in dollars because of the petrodollar, because many countries around the world trade in dollars, because many international commodities are sold only in dollars. The US dollar is very, very valuable compared to other currencies because it is so widely used. But what happened in 2020? The U.S. economy slowed down, and global trade slowed down, and travel slowed down, and the U.S. dollar was used a lot less. And what also happened in 2021? China's economy turned back on, and China kept moving ahead while our economy was still lagging behind. And as a result, more people started using the Chinese currency because Chinese economy was back on and our economy wasn't. More people were using the Chinese currency than were using U.S. currency. And that's generally how the issue with currency works. The more people that use a currency, the more it's circulated. At that point, the value of it increases. The less people use it, the less, Now, there's also the fact that they've been printing money, right? They've been printing lots of dollars lately, and that's related. That's inflation, etc. And that is a way they've been trying to deal with to manage the effects of the pandemic. They had, inflation. So that's an aspect of it also. But at the end of the day, the value of the dollar in relation to other currencies, is directly related to how many people use it. And because of the pandemic, people weren't using it as much because our economy slowed down. While other economies kept going, people haven't been using the US dollar as much. How can China be socialist if it has a Disneyland? Well, it's funny. This actually reminds me. I was asked a similar question, not exactly the same question. I remember when I took geometry in summer school, in high school, I took geometry. And I was in the class, and someone asked me, would we be able to have amusement parks in socialism? And I said, yes. There is nothing about an amusement park that is contrary to socialism. Right? Now, Disneyland is private. Now, I know there's been complaints, though. I believe Disney has been complaining about the fact that the workers that are, the Chinese government has been controlling Disneyland, and the Chinese Communist Party, the members of the employees there that are in the party have been exerting their authority at the company. I remember reading an article about that a few years ago. China has a market sector. right? There's a private company in China. There's, Disney, which is an American company, has been allowed to set up shop in China. You know, um, as Chaya says in the chat, socialism is when there's no amusement parks. I mean, I don't know. Would you now? Here's my question for the questioner: would you consider it to still be socialist if it was like Mao land? Would that be okay, or is are all amusement parks not socialist, or is it just amusement parks for American companies? Or is it, I mean, what is it that makes this? I think that when we have socialism in the United States, there will be all kinds of amusement parks. Maybe not Disneyland. Maybe Disney will go out of existence. But I would think we would have some kind of, excuse me, we'd have some kind of entertainment, right? I would hope so. So there you go. All righty. Um, the John Birch Society and their distortion of Marxism. All right. So the John Birch Society was a far right wing anti communist organization that was founded in the early 60s, I believe. It's rooted in McCarthyism. It had been, it was kind of a grouping of folks who'd been around a long time. There'd been a lot of these right wing anti communists, tended to be doctors, lawyers, middle class folks who were very anti communist. They have a book that I actually own and I've read their manifesto, their statement of principles. It's called The Blue Book by Robert Welch. The founder was Robert Welch. If you read it, their view, they argue that basically the democracy and the republic are opposite concepts, right? And that a republic is a responsible elected government. A democracy is vulgar mob rule, and that communism is democracy. It's mob rule leading to the tyranny of a party, whereas a republic respects the right of the individual. What's interesting is the John Birch Society. I was kind of amused. So there is some deeper philosophy in there. I mean, they talk about Plato versus Aristotle. They consider themselves to be Platonists. They reject Aristotle. And on top of that, they quote some of the more extreme far right. They quote Oswald Spengler, and his book The Decline of the West is quoted in the John Birch Society manual. But basically, the Blue Book by the John Birch Society, if you read Robert Welch and what he wrote, their belief is basically that communism is a vast Wall Street conspiracy. That Wall Street, big corporations, the Rockefellers, the Eastern establishment, basically. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and the DuPonts, they want absolute power. And so, in order to create absolute power, they've fomented chaos and mob rule, to overturn the rule of law and respected institutions so that they can stay in power. And they're libertarians, basically. They believe in, unregulated free market capitalism. It's the middle class doctors and lawyers who don't like big capital and big corporations, but also don't like the working class movement. They see them both as a threat to their sacred individual. And this is classic petty bourgeois ideology. And this is the viewpoint you get from George Orwell and his writings. You also get this from Ayn Rand and her writings. The dystopianism of collectivism, right? The broad masses of people, we're going to lose our sacred individuality. We're either going to be crushed by big capital or crushed by the workers' movement. Our individuality is threatened. Collectivism is a threat. We need to have our sacred individualism. We need to fight big capital. We need to fight the workers' movement and the communists. And we need to just preserve lower levels of capital. And that's who the John Birch Society was. There's actually a member of my family who was not a member of the John Birch Society. There was a member of my family, a relative. He was not a member, from what I understand, but he was familiar with them during the 1960s. He would go, he was a member of my family who would, he would go to their cocktails, I guess. He lived in a suburban neighborhood at the time, and in the neighborhood, I guess, he was a salesman, and everyone in the neighborhood after work in the early 60s, they would go to one person's house to drink cocktails after work, and many people, a few people in the neighborhood were members of the John Birch Society. And the way the John Birch Society organized was they would have these kind of cocktail parties where people would go over to someone's house and they would drink cocktails while somebody gave a presentation about some law or some proposal. And then they would sell you one of their books, and then you would buy their book and send it to a member of Congress, and you'd send their books to a member of Congress. It was this kind of like cocktail parties for middle class people, doctors, lawyers, salesmen, folks they were not factory workers. They were more middle class, suburban folks who hated communists. They tended to be racist, right? And they would go to somebody's house, listen to some speeches. They'd all write a letter to their congressman. They'd all buy the new book that the John Birch Society had just published from American Opinion Publishers, and they'd stick it in an envelope and send it to their congressman. And it was a conservative movement in the early '60s, and it was basically the Republican Party. The Republican Party was the weaker wing of capitalism during the early '60s. During the early '60s, the more liberal bourgeoisie had the upper hand, right? After the defeat of McCarthyism had been a threat to so many big capitalists, the Rockefellers especially, but the Carnegies, the DuPonts, and the Morgans, they were leaning more to the Democrats, to Johnson, to Kennedy, right? That the CIA, soft power apparatus, they had the upper hand, right? That there was kind of a feeling that the lower levels of capital and McCarthyism had gotten out of control, and so the ruling class, was doing more of a managerial kind of thing. So because big capital had kind of shifted out of the Republican Party in the early '60s, the Republican Party became dominated by more ideological far-right elements. And it's very similar to what happened with the Tea Party, right? During the Bush years, during the Clinton years, big capital was in both parties, really. But then, it's very clear that, during the last term of President George W. Bush, big capital suddenly shifted into the Democratic Party. And as a result of that, the Republican Party became dominated by far-right elements. And we're still living in that period. I would argue that now, the Republican Party is dominated by lower-level capitalists and far-right elements because big capital has largely shifted into the Democratic camp. The neocons changed that. During the neocon period in the '70s, '80s, and '90s, the neocons were just kind of mainstream politicians who were in the Republican Party. But yeah, now that most the biggest and wealthiest interests in the United States have shifted into the Democratic camp, as a result of that, we now have a situation where the Republican Party is dominated by lower level capitalists, right? It's very similar. And how did it come? With information technology. In the '50s, it was TV. Television is what first shifted things in favor of McCarthyism, but then it was TV that undid McCarthyism. And it was the liberals who had the upper hand with TV. In our time, it was social media, right? Social media came and it shifted things in favor of the liberals, right? That it's the higher level capitalists who tend to be in terms of information technology, right? Media, managing the media, that's the intelligence apparatus, Silicon Valley, right? And that the intelligence apparatus, they tend to be smarter, right? They tend to be smarter folks, more strategic in how they operate, whereas the lower level capitalists just want to make money. And so there was a new breakthrough in information technology, the rise of social media, gave the upper hand to the more liberal wing. And so as a result, the Republican Party becomes dominated by more far-right elements. Give it time, right? If things were to shift and the big capital became Republicans, you can bet that the Democratic Party would probably become dominated by Bernie Sanders people. You have to remember, when you're not actually the dominant faction, you can say whatever you want because you're not going to actually create the policies. Right? And that's the thing, right? I mean, the Tea Party can be as crazy as they want because they're not actually going to implement the policies, right? The Democrats have the upper hand, right? So if if you look, in the Reagan years, before the rise of Bill Clinton and such, the Democrats were much more left-wing. They were much more pro-labor, much more anti-war. Why? Because they were losing. There was no danger of them implementing their policies. When you're the opposition, you can say all kinds of stuff because you don't actually do it. But yeah, the John Birch Society in the early 1960s, as the Democratic Party suddenly had the upper hand, Kennedy, Johnson, the defeat of McCarthyism, they were a far-right grouping that gained a huge amount of influence in the Republican Party, the John Birch Society. I've read some of their literature, American Opinion Press, I think it was called, and they're far right wing. Again, it's libertarian but petty bourgeois, right? It's the idea, and that they eventually claimed that President Eisenhower was a communist, and they had this secret book that it was called. That it was, they claimed no one had ever read. There were a couple people who joined the John Birch Society who became neo-Nazis. The book is called Lily. The book is called The Politician, and they claimed it was a secret. They claimed it didn't exist. It was like only shown to members who had paid enough money. It was kind of a scam. It was kind of a pyramid scheme. But it was like if you joined and you paid enough money, eventually they showed you the secret book. And the secret book was called, and eventually they had to publish it because it was exposed. But the secret book was called The Politician, and it claimed that Dwight Eisenhower was a communist because his brother was a communist, because his brother was a member of a church, and some members of that church had supported the Spanish Republic in the Spanish Civil War or something like that. It was ridiculous. Right, ethnocentric nation would be supported, but right, ethnocentric nation. Nation, socialist, internally, but oppose Maoists. Okay, writing it down. There was one intellectual who was very prominent in the John Birch Society. His name was his name was like a palindrome. It was like Rivero P. Oliver. Or it was like his first name was Oliver spelled backwards. Ravello P. Oliver. It was like that was his name, and he became a neo-Nazi. That guy was a Holocaust denier and such. However, they kicked him out. They kicked Ravello P. Oliver out, and then they made clear that the Holocaust, they believed the Holocaust happened. They considered Nazism to be a form of communism. They repudiated anti-Semitism. They had many prominent Jewish members. They were kind of going in a neo-Nazi direction in the early 60s, but then they zigged in another direction. I think, 65, 66, 1966 is when they came down, and they're pro-Israel, and they were pro-Israel after that. I think that what happened was that when Israel was first created, you have to remember it was Democrats who supported Israel, and many Republicans didn't. Many Republicans considered Israel to be a liberal thing. Israel had presented itself as a very socialist country. The Soviet Union was aligned with Israel. The major party in Israel was the Labor Party, Haganah. So because of that, there were many conservatives, like I believe Robert Taft, who was a very famous, conservative far-right guy in Ohio. He did the Taft-Hartley law. He was kind of against Israel. And there are many conservatives who said, oh, why are we giving American money to some socialist commune in the middle of the desert? That was their feeling, right? It was this kind of like, oh, we're helping some communist, socialist, hippy-dippy commune in the middle of the desert. We're not going to help Israel. Israel presented itself to the world as this hippy-dippy, liberal, socialist place full of, free-thinking intellectuals and stuff. And so because of that, a lot of conservatives were opposed to Israel. But then, as things progressed, the Soviet Union became more and more anti-Israel. The Soviet Union in the 50s, they started finding Israeli spies in the Soviet Union and executing them, in Czechoslovakia and other places. And then on top of that, you had the oppression of the Palestinians. You had the emergence of the Arab resistance, right? Arab socialism emerged in Egypt with Abdel Nasser, and then in Iraq and in Syria, and you had the rise of Baathism. So as the 1960s got going, Israel became more and more pro-imperialist. So the John Birch Society was a group that thought communism was the biggest evil. And so yeah, as they progressed through the 1960s, they were very big, from like 1960 to maybe like 1965, 66. But as they started to decline in influence, I haven't watched that debate yet. I haven't watched it. Um, you know, um, but as they started to decline in influence, they did come out in support of Israel. They expelled Holocaust deniers. They made clear that they stopped tolerating Nazis in their own ranks. They're their own thing, and they're still around. The John Birch Society is still around. They have a website. I remember I used to, a couple years ago, during the Ferguson uprising, I remember when Ferguson was rebelling in 2014, I remember I watched the John Birch Society, the leader of the John Birch Society, had these like fireside chats he would give. And I watched them because they were hilarious, because he got everything wrong. And he was, and he's this guy, and he's got like white hair and this very serious look on his face, and he had a copy of The Militant from the Socialist Workers Party. He had a copy of the RCP newspaper, and he said, "Now I'm holding up here a copy of The Militant. This is from the Maoist communists of the Socialist Workers Party. And I've got here the Revolutionary Communist Party. Now these are Trotsky," and he got everything wrong. And he's just sitting there trying to prove that because some communist newspaper was supporting Ferguson, that proves that the Ferguson uprising is communist. And it was hilarious. It was hilarious. But I mean, they're still around. I mean, and they're against the UN, and it's I don't know. They don't really have very much influence anymore. But yeah, the height of their influence, I would say, the height of the John Birch Society's influence, I would argue, was the early '60s, when they came to kind of dominate the Republican Party. Barry Goldwater was very much seen as a sympathizer with the John Birch Society. And the John Birch Society, they were, I mean, they claim to be against racism. They claim to be, but they're against anti-racism also, right? They opposed the Civil Rights Act because they said, oh, if a business wants to discriminate, that's their right, right? And the Civil Rights Act, violates the right of business owners to discriminate, right? And that was generally, they believe in capitalism. They believe in free market capitalism. Ron Paul is considered to be very close to the John Birch Society. He speaks at their conventions. And when he was first elected, he was, considered to be a Birch Society guy. I mean, he was, you know, you type in Ron Paul, John Birch Society, and you will see Ron Paul speaking at their events, getting standing ovations. Ron Paul and the John Birch Society love each other. I mean, and that's, if you want to understand what Ron Paul's about, go and read the John Birch Society. Again, they're a section of the far right that is not explicitly racist. They're a section of the far right that is not, they're not white nationalists per se. They're not, but they do think there's a secret conspiracy that dominates the world. They'll talk about the Illuminati, right? I think they think communism is a front for the Illuminati, right? They're into some of that Illuminati stuff. And they're libertarians. They want, free market capitalism. And they're kind of paranoid, conspiratorial libertarians, I guess. But it's a right wing faction that's around, but they're nowhere near as big as they once were. The height of their power was the early '60s. There's songs about them. Bob Dylan has the John Birch Blues, Talking John Birch Blues, and on one of his albums, Bob Dylan sings a song about them, and there's a song by the Chad Mitchell Trio, which was a folk music group. Oh, we're the John Birch Society, the John Birch Society. They're just a right wing group. I mean, I don't know what more there is to say about them. It was a good super chat because it's interesting to me. I mean, I study these political movements and how they function. So there you go. The Chinese Communist Party forcing corporations to give away their profits. Again, not capitalism, right? Yes, socialist, capitalist countries have taxes and such, but yeah, again, the Chinese Communist Party going to these corporations and making them give their profits away, that doesn't sound much like capitalism. I mean, this isn't taxation. This is just them just being forced to give their profits up. I mean, I'm sorry, China's not a capitalist society. There is capitalism in China. There's a lot of private capital in China, and corporations, that are private, but the state controls the means of production and forces it to work in the interests of society at whole. There's a market sector, but that market sector is not free. And on top of that, that market sector isn't the only thing around. The state controls banking. The state controls major industries, corporatism versus neoliberalism. So there you go. I mean, there you go. All right. Why is Occupy against being incorporated? I mean, you're referring to the Occupy Wall Street movement, which is about 10 years ago, and why did they not want to incorporate? I think they didn't want to incorporate because, if they became a corporation, then, there would, they could barely agree on anything. I'm sorry, I was there. They couldn't agree on anything. Anything. It was so many different people. There was, this vague, we are the 99%, all day, all week, Occupy Wall Street, we are the 99%. Other than that, they couldn't agree on anything. Libertarians, anarchists, communists, socialists, liberals, all kinds of people who didn't agree on anything. There were, yeah, it was, so if you became a corporation, you'd have to have a CEO, you'd have to have like a statement of principles, and they would never be able to agree on any of that. So I don't know, and I don't understand, so I guess that's why I don't think they would ever incorporate. So are socialists anti-union? Not generally. No, socialists are generally pro-union. It was socialists who built the labor movement in the United States. It was socialists in the United States who built the labor movement, right? I mean, the CIO was built by the Communist Party. The leadership of the AFL for many years was affiliated with the Socialist Party, right? The United Auto Workers, it was the Walter Reuther, Victor Reuther. They were Socialist Party members that built the United Auto Workers Union. Um, Eugene Debs, Gus Hall, the industrial workers of the world, Joe Hill. I mean, the labor movement labor unions in the United States tend to be built by socialists. Now there's an ultra left current. I believe Daniel DeLeon, he wrote a pamphlet called "Labor Unions or Socialism," where he argued, well, the answer is not labor unions; it's a socialist revolution. And I believe Marx polemicized against something called the iron law of wages. There were some who argued that, if the workers go on strike and get better wages, then you'll just have inflation. So you just have to have a revolution. And you sometimes get ultra leftist trends that are against unions entirely because the answer is revolution or something. But generally, Karl Marx refers to labor unions in the Communist Manifesto. He writes, the working class form combinations. And that refers to labor unions, right? That workers form unions to assert their power and assert their power in a struggle against the employer. Communists tend to support the labor movement. I've got videos, the history of communists and the labor movement here. I have graphics and everything. I talk about it. The 1934 strike wave, the Teamsters, the IWW. Socialism and the labor movement and labor unions in this country are very closely tied together. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Next question. The Paris Commune of 1871, proletarians make their own state. How does that fit the CPI agenda? Well, here's the thing. Okay? Right? Right? And this is, and I've explained this before, and I'll explain this again. There are 3 stages that are distinct in the transition to socialism. The first is the program. Socialists develop a program. Sometimes it's called a transitional program. Sometimes it's just called their program. Socialists, revolutionaries, communists, they develop what they're for. And they go around saying, this is what we believe in. And those things that they advocate are things that challenge property relations. They are demands, policies that could be implemented, but implementing them would require pushing back capitalist power. The Communist Manifesto ends with 10 planks, the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. That's the program. Right? The program in Russia was peace, land, and bread. The program in China was land to the tiller and defeating the Japanese invaders. And the program is something that seems very sensible. It's not violent revolution. It's not tear down the state. It's things that seem very sensible, but only can be achieved by changing property relations. And the communists go to the population and they say, this is what we're for. And they build a mass movement centered around the program. That's step 1, is building a mass movement centered around the program. Eventually, that movement takes control of the government. But that program cannot be implemented with a capitalist government, right? You know, you could have the most revolutionary person get elected president of the United States. You're still going to have an FBI. You're still going to have a CIA. You're still going to have a Pentagon, right? And in order to implement the program, the capitalist state must be broken up. A new state must be created. New policing agencies must be created. A new kind of military must be created. A new kind of police force must be created. You cannot implement a socialist program with a capitalist state. So, after building a mass movement around the program, in order to implement the program, a new state must be created to implement the program. You couldn't have peace, land, and bread with the provisional government. The Bolsheviks had to create the Soviet government so they could have peace, land, and bread. You couldn't have land to the tiller with the Republic of China, so they had to create the People's Republic of China. Right? In Venezuela, they had to pass a whole new constitution. They had to change the way the military works, right? That in order to carry out a socialist program, you have to build new apparatuses of people's power. You have to build Bolivarian circles and communities. You have to change the military. You have to change the police. That you can't simply, what the quote from Karl Marx from the Civil War in France is, you can't simply seize control of the capitalist state. Right? The essence of the state is bodies of armed men, police, military, intelligence agency, and you need to change the nature of the state. And so, after building a mass movement around the program, that mass movement would get elected, or it would, otherwise take control of the state, and then it would have to create a new state. It would have to create new policing agencies. You'd have to create a new intelligence agency. The CIA would have to be broken apart because the CIA, is committed to anti-communism. The FBI would have to be broken apart. The FBI was created as an anti-communist organization. You'd have to get rid of the Pentagon because it's the military-industrial complex. You'd have to build a new military committed to socialist principles, right? But moving towards socialism would require making a new state, a new constitution perhaps. And then, with that new state that was necessary in order to carry out the program, that new state takes control of the means of production and organizes the economy. And so you have socialism. And these are three distinct things. One is the United Front, or the Popular Front, or the program. Right? It's a mass movement of people who are for something. The second stage is taking control of the state. That's called the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? Under capitalism, we have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie dictates, right? Well, the idea is the dictatorship of the proletariat is the people dictate. That we, the broad masses, we're the ones who dictate government policy. That stage two is the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then with the dictatorship of the proletariat, you're able to get to stage number three, which is socialism. Now, this is a process. Stage number one is building a mass movement around a program, around policies that make sense to people. Violent revolution doesn't make sense to people. Get rid of capitalism, have a whole new system, well, that might make sense to you and I, but that doesn't make sense to most people. But the 4-point plan of the Center for Political Innovation makes great sense to people. Number one, mass program of reconstruction of the country. Rebuild the United States of America. Hire the unemployed to do it. Step two, public control of natural resources. Step three, public control of banking. Step four, an economic bill of rights. That 4-point program is something that people can make sense to people. If you tell people, hey, we need to hire all the unemployed people and have them put to work rebuilding our country because it's falling apart, that makes sense to people. Hey, instead of letting big corporations get rich off of our oil and our natural gas and our coal and our timber, that should go into the public budget so we can have more schools and hospitals. That makes sense to people. Hey, instead of having big banks, control the purse strings of the country, why don't we have the lending of money be done for the good of the country, done for the good of the community control of banking? That makes sense to people. Step four, making sure that every American has a job and housing and education. That makes sense to people. And that's all great. And if you knock on somebody's door and say, this is what I'm for, people will generally agree with those 4 points. However, in order to implement those 4 points, you would have to beat back lots of capitalist power. The power of the big monopolies and the big corporations would be against you. And in order to implement that program, you would have to use the state to implement it. You'd have to have a state that was strong enough to beat back capitalist power, and that wouldn't be the capitalist state of the United States. The FBI wouldn't do that for you. CIA wouldn't do that for you. So in order to implement that program, you would have to change the nature of the state. And then step number 3 is once the state is under the control of society as a whole, that state can implement the program and transition to full socialism. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And these are 3 distinct phases. And the problem in the United States is that I've noticed that most communist groups in the United States tend to not distinguish between these 3 things at all. They tend to equate all 3 of them as the same, and they're not. 1 is a mass program. 2, dictatorship of the proletariat. 3, socialism. Most groups try to sell you all 3 at once. And then you get some groups that never, that only talk about the first one and never talk about the rest. And it's like, no. You have to be clear, there are 3 distinct phases. The transition to socialism is a 3-step process. But the first step is coming up with policies that make sense to people. Policies that make sense to people. That they would be willing to join a mass movement around. Exactly, President Jesus. Who? And that's the distinction we need to make. And this is how communist parties operate in any other country in the world. Communist parties go around saying, this is what we're for. This is what we believe in. And they mobilize the public around it. They build a movement around what they're for. All right. Now, this question was an interesting one. Would an ethnocentric nation be socialist internally but oppose Maoists? What? What? I don't even know. First of all, what's an ethnocentric nation? I mean, is the United States an ethnocentric nation because of white privilege? I mean, is that what you're getting at? I mean, is France an ethnocentric nation because it's historically white people? Is Israel an ethnocentric nation since there's one religious ethno group that it is their state? I mean, I don't know what you're getting at there. And could it be socialist internally but oppose Maoists? I don't know. I mean, what are Maoists? I mean, there's a lot of people. I mean, I oppose Maoists, and I'm not an ethnocentric nation, but the Naxals in India, most communists in India oppose the Naxals in India. The Shining Path in Peru, the overwhelming majority of communists in Peru oppose the Shining Path. But if you just mean people that are inspired by Mao, there you go. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you're getting at there, right? This is a strange question. Very, very strange question. But that's okay. I generally tend to answer people's questions. All right. What is the difference between corporatism and neoliberalism? Well, corporatism is an economic theory associated with fascism. I believe Benito Mussolini, he articulated the idea that corporations in Italy would be, under the domination of a corporate, right? Like the idea is that the employer and the employees would be joined together, and there would be like a government manager, and who kind of managed them and heard the concerns of the workers and heard the concerns of the employers and worked with them to make them do what was in the interest of the nation overall. Corporatism is a variation of fascist economics, and it's fiction. It doesn't actually happen, right? Fascist societies, Nazi Germany, Italy, Spain under Franco, these were capitalist countries, right? The state was heavily involved in managing capitalism, but there was no central planning of the economy. It was, private profits were in command. There was, it's state management, but in a lot of cases, in Nazi Germany, state management was not even, there was a military-industrial complex, but that was it. There was very little nationalization in Nazi Germany, very little nationalization in fascist Italy, but yes, it's fascism. You build kind of a strong state to try and an attempt to stabilize capitalism. Bonapartism on part of one section of the ruling class. That's corporatism. Corporatism is an economic theory put forward by fascists in the 1930s about how to manage their state. Neoliberalism has kind of the opposite view. The opposite view of the state. Debates upcoming. Neoliberalism has kind of the opposite view. Neoliberalism doesn't want a big state to try and stabilize capitalism. It wants the opposite. Neoliberalism argues the only role of the state is to help facilitate the private market. Neoliberalism wants to privatize things that are generally done by the government. Neoliberalism says, why does the government need to run schools? We can have charter schools for profit. Neoliberalism says, why does the government need to run prisons? We can have prisons for profit. Neoliberalism is the idea that we get the government out of the economy. Corporatism is a demagogic fascist attempt to argue that with a strong state they can stabilize capitalism. Neoliberalism is the idea that the state shouldn't be involved in capitalism at all. The state shouldn't be involved in the economy. So yeah, they're kind of opposite economic theories. I reject them both. Corporatism, it's fake. It doesn't actually come into existence. It's part of fascist demagogy. Oh, we don't need socialism. We can just have corporatism. I can build, Mussolini. I can build my corporate state. Is that offensive to Italians? But if you watch Mussolini, he's waving his arms around and he's going to build this corporate state. We don't need socialism. He's going to build this big, strong corporate state, and neoliberalism, on the other hand, says, "Oh no, we don't want a state. We don't want a state, right? We want to get the state out of the economy." They're kind of opposite concepts. So there you go. Portugal was fascist, corporatist, and NATO founder, says Piha. Yes, actually, that is correct. Yes, Portugal until 1975 was ruled by a fascist government, and it was this idea that, that they have, it was managed capitalism, Bonapartism, right? 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, right? And Spain and Portugal were fascist up until the 1970s. And it was communists who brought down the fascist regimes in both of those countries. That's why in both Spain and in Portugal, the communists are considered, well respected by much of the population because they eventually they operated underground trade unions, they organized resistance, and ultimately brought down the fascist governments of those countries. The United States propped up the fascist governments there. Richard Nixon was very friendly with Franco in Spain. And Portugal. Hey, would you consider interviewing Gabriel Rockhill? He has done an amazing work on fascism. I've never heard of Gabriel Rockhill, but I would be open to it. I would have to look at what Gabriel Rockhill has had to say, and I'd have to look. I don't know what his I don't know what his position is. Discords, writing that down. But there you go. So yeah, the person asked what's the difference between corporatism and neoliberalism. I think I answered that. I could go with that. Prosecute war criminals. Yeah. Right. What else? All right. Upcoming debates. I've been approached, and I want to debate some people. There was one debate that was looking to happen, but then, they changed their minds. There was another debate, and yeah, there's a couple people talking to me about debates coming up. I'm a little overwhelmed. I'm getting so many requests for podcasts right now. I'm getting so many requests for different things. I'm a little overwhelmed right now, but there is a possible big name debate in the works. I can't really say who it is, but there's a possible big name debate in the works, and if that, goes through, that will get my full attention. You can be sure about it. But there's some other names in the works. But yeah, I mean, look, we're expanding right now. We are really expanding right now. So there you go. So yeah, we're expanding, and I'm getting a lot more requests. So I'm trying to figure out a new method for managing. So many people are joining the Center for Political Innovation. I mean, we're becoming a real force to be reckoned with. So there you go. Are there discords associated with this community? There are, but I don't endorse any of them. I'm not responsible for the content on any of them, and I they fight with each other. There's multiple discords that have been organized around Center for Political Innovation, around CPI, Caleb Maupin. I'm not against them. If you want to go on there, it's a great place to meet people and engage with people about the contents of these lives. I don't endorse any of them because I don't have enough time to keep track of it. And I was getting so many emails about, oh, this person's actually a Nazi on your Discord, or this person's a homophobe, or this. And I just said, look, the Discords are managed by people in the Discords. If you love these streams and you want to get on Discord and be part of one of the Discord communities around this, go for it. Go for it. But I can't be responsible for those communities because there's so much confusion and so many people getting angry with me about what somebody said on the Discord. So if you want to be part of a Discord around this community, go for it. I support you in doing that, but I'm not going to police the Discord. I just don't have the time to police the Discord around this community. So there's that. Would a socialist government in the United States prosecute war criminals? I would think that it would do such a thing. Yes. I would think that that would be a possibility, but it may be that in the process of transitioning to socialism, there's some kind of negotiated amnesty, right? To get the military not to oppose us or something, they would negotiate some kind of amnesty or something. I mean, I don't know. And again, it would be about the struggle, right? It would be what develops in the course of struggle. We shall see. I would think that that would be a very big part of it, right? That especially the people of the world would want to see the U.S. imperialists and the war crimes committed by the imperialists to be, held accountable for. But that would be based on the balance of forces at the time. And I must say, while at the same time I'm all for holding people accountable and stuff, I'm not a big fan of vengeance. I'm not a big fan of punishment. I'm not a big fan of the death penalty. I'm not a big fan of people, cathartic revenge. I don't think that's a healthy society. One of the most beautiful things about China, and there were plenty of executions in China, under Mao, and there was plenty of torture, and so I'm not glossing over it. But one of the most beautiful things that I've read about is how the emperor, the emperor of China, right, the emperor of China, after the revolution, he became a gardener. He went to prison for collaborating with Japan. And in prison, he underwent thought reform and was convinced to become a communist. He apologized for his crimes against the Chinese people as the emperor and for collaborating with the Japanese. And then he got out of prison and he was a gardener. That's beautiful, right? I think that's very beautiful, right? And it shows that there was a feeling that okay, he was born into this position of the emperor. He did things that ultimately hurt the Chinese people. But he did his time or whatever. He got out and he became a gardener. I think that's very, very beautiful. It's very beautiful. And that shows kind of a healthy society. That's a little bit of a more healthy way of doing things. Not that there weren't lots of bad things that happened in China during the Cultural Revolution. There were. So I'm not trying to gloss over that. But that's an example of a society. Again, they didn't have some big public execution where they cut his head off or something. They just, he went to prison for collaborating with Japan, with the enemy. In prison, he was convinced that he was wrong and came to really believe that, and then after that, he became a gardener. There you go. And, as much as I can understand why many people are full of rage and all that, I don't think that that's ultimately healthy. And that's part of constructive socialism. Socialism is not about tearing things down. It's not about punishing people. It's about building. It's time to start building. I'll recite a poem I've recited many times before. On a busy street, on a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam, and a side wall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled? Like those you might hire if you wanted to build? The foreman just smiled, said, "No, indeed. Common labor is all that I need, for I can easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do." So I thought to myself, as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I that type who scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? I like that. I like that little bit of poetry. That was recited to me by an old communist years ago. I did not write it. It's one of those poems that's attributed to all kinds of different people on the internet. It's a beautiful piece of poetry. It really sums up kind of the way that people should, people should interact with people. I think you should always try to be a builder, try to be constructive, right? I've talked about how rage can be addictive, right? Rage can be addictive, but it can also destroy you. You don't want to be consumed by rage. You want to try to be constructive. You want to try to build relationships. So there you go. There you go. All right. Is there anything else anyone wants me to ask about? Speak now or forever hold your... Well, actually, I'll probably be back on tomorrow, so not forever, but now is the time to come forward. Now is the time to come forward with your requests. Is there anything else people want to hear about? Anything else? Any other super chat questions before we end this? Anything else? Anything else? I guess not. I guess not. I guess not. So on that note, we are going to cut it off here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. I didn't skip your question. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.